My name is Sylvia Monroe. I am 67 years old. I spent 4 decades working as an accountant, saving every penny, raising my only son after my husband died too young. I thought retirement would mean peace. I thought I had finally earned the right to breathe, to rest, to take one simple trip just for myself. But the day I returned home from that retirement trip, dragging my little suitcase across the familiar driveway, I found my entire life waiting for me in black garbage bags, lined up at the gate like monuments, every bag bulging with my clothes, my books, the small objects of memory that had shaped a lifetime. And standing there, at the end of the driveway, was my son Ethan. Next to him, his wife Melissa, arms folded, eyes sharp. Melissa pressed her hand against Ethan's arm. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Say it." Ethan swallowed hard. For a moment, I saw hesitation, a flicker of the boy I once carried in my arms through a thunderstorm when he was burning with fever. But then he looked down, avoiding my eyes, and said the words I will never forget. "Mom, I agree. You have to go. You are retired now. It is time for you to leave." That was it. No discussion, no warning. Just a verdict delivered at the gate. I froze. The smile I had carried since boarding the last train of my trip slipped away. My body felt cold, even though the afternoon sun was warm. I looked down, and in one of the bags, something had fallen out. A sweater. The wine-colored wool sweater I had knitted for Ethan during his first year in college. I remembered every stitch, every night at the kitchen table with my tired hands working the needles while he studied. Ethan saw it too. His eyes lingered on it for just a second. I thought, maybe, he might step forward, pick it up, say he was sorry. But he looked away. He turned his face from me. I bent down slowly, picked up the sweater, and pressed it against my chest. Then, from another bag, I saw pieces of porcelain glinting in the light. I reached inside and found what was left of my husband's old coffee cup, the sea green one he used every morning until the cancer took him from us. Cracked, broken, tossed aside like nothing. I wrapped the shards in a handkerchief and held them as if I were holding him again. Not a word came from my lips, not a single plea. Instead, I opened the trunk of my car and began lifting each garbage bag, one by one. My body trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than any load of fabric or paper. Melissa whispered something to Ethan, smirking as if victory belonged to her. Ethan did not look at me again. When the last bag was inside, I stood there with the sweater in one hand, the wrapped coffee cup in the other. My son had just told me I was no longer welcome in the very house I had kept alive for decades. And yet, I smiled, a thin, dry smile that tasted of ash. "Fine," I said softly. That single word carried the heaviness of 30 years and the release of 30 years as well. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and started the engine. No one helped. No one waved goodbye. The tires rolled across the pavement, crunching against the gravel. I did not look back at the gate. I left my house, my son, and the life I had built behind me. That is how my story begins. I found my belongings in garbage bags at the gate. My son stood there with his wife, telling me, "You are retired. Get out now." And I smiled, got in my car, and drove away. 6 months later, that same son would send me 90 desperate messages. "Where are you?" Before I continue, I want to pause and invite you to stay with me. Stories like this are not easy to tell, and they are not easy to hear. But if you have ever felt discarded, if you have ever been told you no longer belong in the place you poured your life into, then maybe my journey will mean something to you. If you want to hear how I turned garbage bags into new keys, how I found quiet strength after betrayal, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you will not miss the rest of this story, and you will help bring these hidden truths to others who might need them. Because what happened at that gate was not the end. It was only the beginning. My name is Sylvia Monroe. I was 35 when the world split down the middle. Cancer took my husband in a winter that made every breath feel borrowed. I packed his desk with trembling hands and carried home one thing that felt like a lighthouse in fog: his sea green coffee cup with a small chip on the handle where his ring always clicked. I washed it the next morning and the next. I dried it with the good towel and set it by the stove like a promise. Some women light candles. I polished glaze and memory. Work did not wait for sorrow. I kept the clinic books by day and balanced ledgers for a corner grocery by night. 2 jobs kept the lights on, the mortgage current, and Ethan's sneakers intact. I learned the smell of toner and burned coffee, the hum of lights that made midnight feel like noon. When the clinic cut hours, I added weekend tax prep and library classes to learn new software. Numbers were steady. They did not argue, and they balanced when I told the truth. Ethan was 6 then, all elbows and questions. He loved dinosaurs and hallway races. He called the hallway the track, and I became the crowd. On good nights, we spread library books on the couch, and he slept on my arm. On most nights, I folded laundry by the glow of the oven light to nudge the bill down. I kept 3 jars on the fridge: coins, repairs, and hope. The hope jar held a note that said, "Keep going." Grief was not a single storm. It was weather that changed without asking. Some days it felt like sleet. Some days it was fog that made me forget what I went to the pantry to find. I carried grief in one hand, numbers in the other, and Ethan on my hip until he grew too long for my arms. People called me strong. I nodded, because rent does not move for tears, and children do not sleep better when a mother falls apart. Strength, for me, meant packing lunches and paying bills on time. One night, the rain came sideways off the lake, a wind that turned streets into silver ropes. Ethan woke burning hot, skin bright and eyes wild. The clinic was closed. I stood at the window weighing taxis I could not afford against the urgent care across the boulevard that had not processed our new insurance. The only sound I could name was the rattle in my boy's breath, a little engine missing every other spark. I put on my husband's heavy coat and swung Ethan onto my back. He wrapped his arms around my neck, too proud to cry, too sick to talk. We stepped into the rain and kept stepping, block after block, past the laundromat and the card shop where he used to press his nose to the glass. The crosswalk light refused us. I looked both ways and ran. My shoes filled with water. My hair stuck to my face. My mouth kept saying it is all right while my legs kept telling the lie. The nurse at urgent care did not ask for a card first. She swabbed his throat, took his temperature, and told me to breathe. "Strep," she said, pointing to the crimson line on the test strip. A doctor with kind eyes wrote the prescription and said the words "mother's need" at 2 a.m. You did the right thing. I sat in a plastic chair shaking from cold and relief while Ethan slept against my shoulder. The coat dripped on the linoleum. My hands would not stop moving until I touched his forehead and felt it cooler. We came home through gentler rain. I tucked Ethan into bed and stood at the sink washing the sea green mug while the sky paled. I knew then that some rituals are not superstition. They are carpentry for the soul. Every morning after, I washed that mug and wiped the chip where his ring had clicked. I lined it on the shelf by the salt. Same spot, same distance from the stove, like a compass set to north, when the map in your head keeps sliding always. Years stacked up like file boxes. I learned which clients would pay late and which could not pay at all. I learned how to unjam a copier with a butter knife and how to stretch chicken into soup that lasted 3 days. I kept a ledger for the house and a ledger for my heart. Income, expense, hours gained, hours lost. I am not telling this to earn medals. I am telling it because the story of my leaving begins with the truth that I stayed, that I held the roof with ordinary choices, repeated until they hardened into habit. Ethan grew tall and busy. He played basketball and broke one window. He hated Brussels sprouts and loved pancakes shaped like letters. On his 8th birthday, I poured cocoa into the sea green mug and set it across from his plate, a place for a man who was gone but not erased. He asked if his father could hear us. I said yes, though I did not know the rules of heaven. Faith, for me, was rinsing porcelain under warm water and choosing, again and again, to keep going. The night before my trip, I cooked a simple supper: roasted chicken, green beans with lemon, and cornbread. I set 3 plates and laid the silver I always do. Ethan texted that they were 5 minutes out. Melissa sent a thumbs up. I wanted an ordinary evening, a blessing before the train pulled me across the map I had studied for weeks. They arrived with a gust of April air. Ethan kissed my cheek without really landing. Melissa straightened a frame that did not need straightening and glanced at the brochures on the coffee table. A bracelet clicked when she moved. We sat. I asked about work. Ethan said fine. Melissa said busy. A client in real estate. Lots of listings moving. A seller's market if people knew when to get out. I brought the chicken. She complimented the color, then, gently, the salt. I passed the beans and kept my smile. Ethan kept his phone face down at first and then flipped it when it buzzed. Blue light skated across his face. I watched his plate, 2 bites of chicken, none of the beans. I asked about the weekend. He said they might paint the guest room. Melissa said the paint was already in the garage. A fresh start helps a space breathe. Your trip, she said after a sip of water. You must be excited. Trains are very mindful, slow living. Her smile was careful. It is brave to travel alone at your age. I am not brave, I said. I am patient. Patience moves slower than bravery, but it reaches the station just the same. She laughed. Ethan did too after a delay. The phone buzzed again. He turned it face down. We ate in a hush that was not silence. Utensils brushing ceramic, the refrigerator's soft rattle. I reached for the sea green coffee cup and stopped. At dinner, it did not belong on the table. It sat on its shelf by the stove, chipped handle catching the light. I knew where it was without looking. The market really is strong, Melissa said, spearing a bean. Empty nesters who downsize now come out ahead. Less maintenance, more cash flow. It is just math. I have always liked math, I said. It shows its work. Exactly, she said. And safety. Houses are a lot to manage. Have you thought about a retirement home, a community, Wonderful places with shuttles and activities. No ladders, no gutters, no snow. The air changed. If feelings had temperature, the room dropped 2 degrees. I buttered a corner of cornbread and set it on my plate. Ethan took a breath as if to interrupt, then let it out and reached for his phone. I looked at his hands. They were his father's hands. Longer at the knuckle, a small scar near the thumb from the broken window when he was 12. "I have thought," I said. "Not decided." She nodded as if we had reached consensus. Her bracelet clicked. "Well, you know we worry. It would give everyone peace of mind." "Peace of mind belongs to whoever is paying for it," I said, not unkindly. Ethan cleared his throat. "Melissa just means options," he said. "It is good to have options." "Options," I repeated. "I will consider them after my trip." Melissa leaned back, arms folding like a closing file. "Of course. And if you want recommendations, I volunteer with a seniors group. I have brochures." "I am familiar with brochures," I said. "They do not always tell the part after page 4. She let the comment pass. Ethan checked a message and smiled at something that did not live at my table. I saw the dining room as a photograph I could not retake. 3 people arranged politely, together and not. We finished the chicken. I packed leftovers in containers. After dishes, Melissa measured the hallway with her eyes. She asked about square footage as if practicing a script. Ethan stood beside the bookcase that still held his trophies. His finger traced the dust around the bases where I had not moved them. "Do you still use the attic?" he asked, too casual. "For Christmas," I said. "And memory." He nodded. "Just wondering." We said our goodbyes on the porch. Melissa hugged with her shoulders. Ethan's hug was warmer but brief. "Text when you bored," he said. I promised I would. When the door closed, I washed the plates in hot water until the ceramic shone. I rinsed the sea green cup last. It was not dirty, but ritual is not about dirt. I dried the chip with a good towel and set the cup by the stove. Handle turned right, like a compass. I told myself they were being careful. I told myself worry sounds blunt when it tries to help. Tomorrow, I would ride a train through the plains and over the mountains. Tomorrow, the windows would turn the country into a slow ribbon. I looked around the room. Everything in its place. Everything labeled by habit. In books, they call it foreshadowing. In real life, it is a prickle at the back of the neck. I turned off the light. The cup caught a sliver of street lamp and held it like a promise. I went to bed believing in mercy. I would not learn until I returned that mercy was not what waited for me at the gate. The train left Chicago in the cool gray of morning, wheels humming like a lullaby stretched across steel. I sat by the window with a paper cup of coffee and my small suitcase overhead. For the first time in years, I was not rushing to balance ledgers or answer calls. The landscape unrolled, endless fields like quilt squares, barns leaning under their own weight, cattle dots moving slow. I told myself this was my retirement gift to me, a ribbon of track across the country. In the dining car, I sat with strangers who spoke about grandchildren and gardens. A man in a ball cap asked if I was traveling to meet family. I said no, just traveling to meet myself. They laughed politely, but I meant it. When pie came, apple, warm, with a scoop of melting vanilla, I ordered a slice for myself. For decades, I had cut pie in halves, in quarters, in eighths, always giving Ethan the largest slice. That morning, with the Mississippi sliding under the bridge, I ate a whole piece alone. It tasted of cinnamon and freedom, with a bite of guilt at the edges. In Denver, I stepped onto the platform and felt the thin air pinch my lungs. The Rockies rose like a wall of bone and snow, older than any grief. I asked a fellow passenger to take a picture of me with the mountains. It was the first time I had asked someone to capture me, not just the scenery. My hair was silver in the sunlight, my smile hesitant but real. Later, in the quiet of my sleeper, I turned the photo on my phone again and again, as if proof that I existed outside of giving. At night, the train's whistle stretched over the dark plains. I took out a notepad and began a letter I would never send. My dear, I wrote to my late husband. Today I ate pie alone. Today I let the mountains frame me. Today I felt time as a gift, not a debt. Ethan is grown now. I hope he has found steadiness, though he seems pulled by tides not his own. I want to believe when I return, we will sit again as mother and son, not as duty and burden. If you were here, you would remind me to hold hope the way you held my hand crossing every street. I folded the page and tucked it into the back of my book, as though silence was safer than postage. The train curved through canyons the color of rust and flame. I pressed my forehead to the glass, watching the Colorado River keep pace beside us, restless and sure. In California, vineyards stretched under the sun, neat lines of vines like scripture written on the land. I promised myself I would bring lavender from the station market home for the kitchen, a new scent to welcome a new chapter. All along the trip, I rehearsed the reunion. I imagined Ethan standing on the porch, Melissa beside him, both smiling in relief that I had returned safe. I saw us at the table again, maybe awkward at first, but softened by my stories of the Rockies, the coast, the strangers I had met. In my dream, Melissa would see me not as an obligation, but as a woman still alive with wonder. Ethan would remember the nights I carried him in storms, the mornings I ironed his shirts. We would sit and share a pot of coffee, my sea green cup at its place, not as relic, but as vessel for tomorrow. The final stretch into San Francisco was gilded by fog lifting from the bay. The bridge appeared like a gate to another life. I walked the piers, tasted sourdough, watched sea lions tumble like clowns. I let myself laugh aloud, the sound strange to my own ears. A woman at a cafe said she liked my hair. I thanked her, and for a moment I felt both young and old, rooted and free. Days passed like gifts unwrapped slowly. Each night I wrote in the notepad, small lines of gratitude, for pie, for mountains, for fog, for strangers' kindness. I did not know that each word was a veil, softening the blow that waited. When the train turned east again, I felt anticipation bloom in my chest. Home, I thought. I carried postcards, lavender, the folded letter, and hope stitched into every pocket. I pictured Ethan meeting me at the station, his eyes bright, his arms open. Perhaps Melissa would have softened. Perhaps she would admit she worried too much. I imagined unlocking the front door and placing the lavender by the window, the sea green cup catching its scent. Instead, when the taxi pulled to my curb, I saw black bags piled high, a barricade of plastic swelling with the weight of a life. Ethan stood at the gate with Melissa beside him, her hand pressing his arm as if to steady him or push him. The reunion I dreamed dissolved in the afternoon light. I looked at the bags and saw not garbage but years, photo albums, linens, sweaters, echoes. I saw Ethan's face, pale with resolve, Melissa's with victory. I saw the sea green cup somewhere in the dark plastic waiting for my hand, and in that moment, As the driver carried my suitcase to the ground, I knew this was not a return. It was an unspoken eviction. Family became frontier. Blood became border. I understood then that the journey I had thought was ending was only beginning, and the price of dignity would be counted not in tickets, but in silence. I drove without music, the road a gray ribbon unspooling while my mind stayed at the gate. The trunk thumped when the plastic bags shifted. That rhythm kept time with shock. Breathe, I told myself. Keep the car between the lines. Go to the one address where someone still says your name. Claire's street waited under tulip trees. I parked before her brick bungalow and watched the porch light hold steady like a small promise. She opened the door before I knocked. Claire's arms came around me without questions. Her hug said, what language could not? Kettle is on, she said. The living room held steady. We moved to the kitchen. She set out 2 white mugs with blue rings and rinsed them with hot water first. She knows my habits from years of closing books together. The kettle sang. Steam lifted. She poured and slid a mug toward me. Tea is a small thing, but that night it felt like a rope thrown from shore. I brought everything, I said. They packed my life into bags. My voice sounded like it had walked a long way and was catching up. Claire did not perform shock. She narrowed her eyes the way she does when a column will not add. Tonight, you sleep, she said. Tomorrow, we sort. Lists first, call second. I began to apologize for arriving unannounced and for the mess in my trunk. She shook her head. She set a plate of butter cookies between us. Hospitality in her house is muscle memory. No preface, no fuss. I lifted the cup. The first swallow steadied my hands, and with it came the picture I did not invite. My husband's sea green coffee cup, found in shards and wrapped in a handkerchief in my purse. In one house, memory was thrown away. Here, comfort was prepared and handed to me with 2 hands. We carried bags in from the car. Claire took the lighter ones and argued for the heavier. I let her win because some victories are medicine. We stacked them along the wall of her guest room, a square space with a narrow bed and a lamp that throws a forgiving circle of light. She did not say, "Stay as long as you need." She behaved as if it were already decided. Back at the table, we made a plan. It was not a battle map, but it had steps. Sleep. Call my late husband's attorney in the morning. Photograph every bag and make an inventory. Pull out documents first. Keep the sweater with me. Place the wrapped cup high on the pantry shelf. Claire's handwriting marched down a yellow pad, neat as a ledger. When I wavered, she pressed the pad toward me and said, "Paper is a bridge. We cross on paper." We covered practicals, the spare key, the parking pass, the hall closet for my coat. We did not linger on Ethan. When I said his name, my throat tightened and words went sideways. Claire reached across and placed her warm hand over mine, not to hush me, only to anchor me. "Later," she said, "tonight is for tea and breathing. Tomorrow is for phone calls." After dishes, I stood at her sink and washed the mugs. I dried the cups with her towel and set them upside down. The simple work brought my breath back. I thought of how many nights I had rinsed the sea green mug after long days. How ritual tells the body to continue when the heart wants to fold. In the guest room, I opened one bag. The wine-colored sweater lay near the top, faint with cedar. I folded it and placed it at the foot of the bed, a small flag for tomorrow. Another bag held frames wrapped in newspaper. Ethan at 8 with sand in his hair. my husband grinning beside us, the three of us ringed by sun. I lined the frames along the windowsill and unwrapped the coffee cup shards, setting the largest pieces together without glue. The seam sketched a lightning across porcelain. Claire knocked and slid the door open with easy courtesy. "Extra blanket is in the closet," she said. "There is more tea if you wake." She squeezed my shoulder and left the door open an inch. That sliver of hallway light worked like a nightlight I had not known I wanted. I lay down without changing and listened to the house breathe. Floors spoke. The heater sighed. A neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. The metronome inside me slowed. I promised I would not disappear into rage. I would begin with paper, with names, with tea. The mug on Claire's counter would still be warm when I rose. That is what a friend can do in one evening. The guest room was square and quiet, but it felt crowded with the bags that lined the wall. Black plastic bulged like swollen shadows, each one tied tight, each one holding fragments of me. My entire life reduced to sacks that once held garden leaves. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at them, my stomach tight. I had carried those bags through the doorway of a friend, but in truth I carried shame through the doorway of my own heart. I told myself to breathe, but each breath came jagged. A sentence formed inside me and would not let go. I was the foundation. Now I am the discard. Years of double shifts, taxes paid on time, neighbors greeted politely, meals placed on the table. Foundation. Now, in the eyes of my only son, I had crossed some invisible threshold into waste. The word trash kept circling like a crow. I pressed my palms into the blanket and reminded myself I was still flesh, still breath, still more than bags. But the humiliation was raw. To be sent away is one wound. To see your life heaped in garbage sacks is another, deeper cut. I had kept a home. I had scrubbed floors with vinegar and lemon to save pennies. I had balanced ledgers at night when my eyes blurred. Yet here I was, balancing the weight of disgrace. The lamp on the nightstand threw a cone of light that stopped short of the ceiling. Around the room, shadows bent across the bags. They looked like silent witnesses, like jurors deciding if I deserved to stay. My hands itched to rip them open, to rescue my sweaters, my cookbooks, the quilt stitched by my mother. But I was too tired, too hollow. Instead, I sat and let the tears fall hot on my hands. I cried silently, careful not to let Claire hear. When I could not stand the pressure of the room, I rose. The floor creaked under my steps. I crossed to the window and unlocked the latch. Cold night air rushed in, sharp with the scent of rain on asphalt. Outside, the streetlight buzzed and a car hummed past, tail lights red as embers. I leaned into the chill. It was my threshold moment. One door had closed with the slam of betrayal. Another opened with a view of resilience. I whispered into the dark, not for anyone to hear, but because the words needed form. My son, I will not break. The sentence lifted into the night like a prayer without a steeple. I pressed my fingers to the sill, grounding myself. The city kept moving beyond my small sorrow. Porch lights flickered on down the block. Somewhere, someone's radio played faint country music. Life was indifferent, but alive, and I chose to remain part of it. I shut the window, but left the curtain open. I needed that slice of streetlight to remind me I was not sealed in plastic, not buried. I returned to the bed and pulled the sweater, wine-colored, faint with cedar, onto my lap. It smelled like closets and winters when Ethan was small, I held it as though it could anchor me. "You are not trash," I told the sweater, and in truth, I was telling myself. Sleep did not come quickly. Shame does not release a body easily. Yet slowly, in the silence, my humiliation began to harden into something else. The bags against the wall no longer looked like verdicts, but like raw material. If I was once foundation, perhaps I could be again. I closed my eyes with that thought. Tomorrow would bring paper, lists, phone calls. Tonight brought one vow. I would not let their verdict define me. I drifted into restless dreams, but one sentence followed me into sleep. I said it once more, quietly, to the room, to the night, to the memory of my husband, to the God I could not name. I will not break. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a stiff back, but with a determination that hummed low like a motor warming in the cold. I made tea in Claire's kitchen, steadying my hands on the warm porcelain cup. I told her I needed to make an appointment, not with a doctor or a counselor, but with a lawyer. She didn't question me. She simply wrote down a name and number I already knew. Arthur Barnes, the man who had handled my husband's estate when he passed away 3 decades ago. Walking into his office was like stepping back in time. The walls smelled faintly of paper and leather, lined with photographs of Arthur shaking hands with clients, diplomas in neat frames. His hair had thinned and gone silver, but his voice was the same, measured, deliberate. "Sylvia," he said, standing with surprising warmth. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" I sat down, clutching my bag close, and told him everything. I didn't dress it up. I told him about the garbage bags. I told him about my son's words, how he said retirement meant exile. Arthur listened with the patience of a man who had heard too many family betrayals, but never let them harden him. When I finished, he leaned back, fingertips pressed together, and said words I hadn't expected. "Sylvia, you know your husband's will still stands. It left the house to you outright. Ethan had no authority to push you out. In fact, what they did could be considered unlawful eviction." I blinked, stunned. For years, I had carried the home like a sacred space for my son. I had assumed, without checking, that by living there as family, everything was shared. But Arthur slid a file across the desk. The faded signatures were still there. My husband's hand, my name. Legal ownership that had never shifted. It was like hearing a buried song I thought I'd lost. I wasn't a guest in that house. I had been the rightful owner all along. Ethan's voice saying, "You have to go," replayed in my mind, but now it sounded hollow, stripped of authority. Arthur tapped the papers gently. "The law is clear. You still hold title. But if you want protection going forward, we should consider creating a trust. That way, your assets, retirement savings, pension, even this house, will be shielded. No one, not even your son, can use them or sign them away without your consent." I felt my spine straighten. This was what dignity looked like. Not loud arguments in the driveway, but ink on paper, signatures no one could erase. I told him yes. I wanted a trust. I wanted clarity written in language no one could twist. He drafted quickly, walking me through each clause with patient precision. A revocable living trust. I would be trustee, with the power to appoint a successor I trusted when the time came. My pension and savings would be retitled in the trust's name. The house, though bruised with betrayal, would be secured as well. And the beneficiaries. I paused long on that line. Ethan's name I did not write. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to exclude him. Instead, I thought of my niece Emily, who had written me letters every Christmas. I wrote her name with steady hand. As the pen left the page, something shifted inside me. A reversal. I had arrived feeling like refuse, the woman with her life in garbage bags. I left carrying documents that affirmed my place, my agency. The reversal wasn't in shouting or confrontation. It was in silence, in the thick weight of legal paper in my hands. Arthur shook my hand firmly. "You have more strength than you realize, Sylvia. This isn't revenge. It's protection. It's reclaiming what's yours." I walked out into the afternoon light, clutching the folder to my chest. The city looked different, less hostile, more navigable. I had lost a son's loyalty, but I had regained my own ground. This was the first brick in building something new. In the quiet of Claire's kitchen later, I spread the documents on the table. She poured tea into the same cup as the night before, steam rising. I touched the handle, remembering the broken coffee mug from my husband. That symbol of memory, now paired with this symbol of law, past and present in conversation. I didn't need to tell Claire everything. She read it in my eyes. For the first time since the bags had been dumped at my feet, I felt the scales tilt back toward balance. My power had returned, not in noise, but in ink. And that night, when I lay down among the bags that held my past, I no longer saw them as trash. They were proof I had survived enough to need protecting. The first victory had been won, not by raising my voice, but by writing my name. When the legal papers were tucked safely into a folder, I knew the next step was shelter. Claire told me I could stay as long as I wanted, but I needed a place that was mine. A door I could lock and a window I could open without feeling like a guest. So I began looking. At 65, I had not imagined I would be scanning classifieds for cheap rentals, circling ads with trembling fingers like a college student. The first place was a narrow room above a laundromat. The landlord, a man with thinning hair and a clipboard, barely glanced at me before asking, "Steady income? Any health issues? You live alone?" He asked the questions like bullets fired in a row. I answered politely, but I could hear what lay beneath. He saw me as liability, not tenant. His eyes lingered too long on my gray hair, my small hands folded in my lap. "We prefer younger tenants," he finally muttered. I left with my cheeks burning. The second place was in a complex near the highway, walls yellowed, air heavy with stale smoke. A younger woman showed me around, talking about security deposits and background checks, while her glance darted to the numbers I wrote on the form. When she asked for proof of double the rent in savings, I folded the paper and slid it back. I realized then, being older meant people measured you not by character, but by statistics. But the third place, small, plain, sitting on the edge of the river, gave me pause. The building wasn't new, but it had wide windows, and from the kitchen, you could glimpse the water glinting. The landlord, a soft-spoken woman named Maria, walked me through. She didn't ask about my age. She asked about what kind of curtains I liked. She pointed to the lock on the door, saying, "It sticks a bit, but I'll have it fixed before you move in." For the first time, I felt she was picturing me not as a risk, but as a neighbor. I signed the papers with a hand steadier than I expected. Maria pressed a set of keys into my palm. Thin, ordinary metal, cool against my skin. Yet to me, they weighed more than gold. Claire hugged me in the parking lot, whispering, "From garbage bags to new keys. That's a story only you could write." The move itself became a montage of kindness. Claire arrived with her hatchback filled with folded chairs and pots. Two old co-workers showed up carrying a donated lamp and a secondhand coffee table. We carried the bags that once marked my humiliation up narrow stairs. But this time, each bag felt lighter, transformed into pieces of a new beginning. In the living room, we placed a worn sofa against the wall, its fabric faded but clean. A bookshelf leaned slightly to one side, waiting to be filled. I set my husband's cracked coffee mug on the shelf, beside the new folder of legal documents. Old and new, wound and remedy, side by side. When the last box was set down, Claire jingled the keys I now held and smiled wide. "You're not a guest anymore, Sylvia. This is yours." That night, after everyone left, I walked barefoot across the small apartment. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint. Outside, the river carried moonlight like silver threads. I turned the key in the lock, heard the click, and felt a current run through me. The garbage bags had been my exile. The keys were my return. As I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and sat by the window, I whispered the words I had carried since that first night of betrayal. "I will not break." But this time, they sounded less like a prayer and more like a promise. I was no longer the woman discarded at the gate. I was the woman who had turned trash into foundation, who had walked out carrying bags, but now closed the door on a home built by choice. The motif was written in steel and silence. Garbage bags to new keys. And with that, I slept. Not heavily, not yet, but peacefully enough to know I had started to build again. The first week in my little apartment by the river, I realized how much of my life had been built around others. For decades, I had poured myself into Ethan, into work, into keeping a roof over our heads. Now the roof was mine alone, and the silence asked me a question I had never learned to answer. How do I stand on my own, for myself? Not as a mother, not as a provider, but simply as Sylvia. The faucet in the kitchen dripped steadily, an annoying rhythm in the quiet nights. In the past, I would have called a handyman or asked Ethan to take a look. But now, with only me here, I went to the hardware store, bought a wrench, and studied a video on my phone. My hands trembled as I fit the tool into place. A twist, a scrape, a grunt. Suddenly, silence. No more dripping. I laughed, not because it was impressive, but because it was mine. A tiny victory sealed in metal. Grocery shopping became a lesson in patience. For years, I bought in bulk, feeding a household, planning meals around a son's appetite. Now I learned to walk past the family-sized cereal boxes, to choose a single loaf of bread, a small carton of milk. I kept a notebook of expenses, marking each receipt carefully. For the first time, I was not stretching every dollar to feed others. I was choosing what nourished me. There was a kind of dignity in that restraint, a rediscovery of self hidden inside the mundane. One evening, after a long day of arranging shelves and balancing my checkbook, I passed the bakery on the corner. Through the glass, I saw a pie. Cherry, glossy with glaze, the kind I had baked countless times for holidays. My instinct was to imagine a table, family gathered, plates lined up. But there was no gathering waiting at home. There was only me. I hesitated, then walked inside and bought one slice. At home, I set the slice on a plate, carried it out to the balcony, and sat under the fading light. The river below caught streaks of pink from the sunset. I picked up the fork, took a bite, and let the sweetness settle on my tongue. My voice broke into the silence, a whisper both strange and tender. For the first time, I eat for myself. The pie was not extravagant. The balcony was small. But in that moment, I felt more human than I had in years. No one needed me to serve them. No one judged what I chose. It was just me, breathing, savoring, alive. I began keeping a small list on the refrigerator titled, Things I Can Do. Fix a faucet. Balance a budget. Buy my own pie. Each line was proof that I was not discarded, not useless. Each act was a stitch in the fabric of a new identity. Sometimes, late at night, I still felt the echo of humiliation, the memory of garbage bags at the gate. But when I looked at the keys hanging by the door, when I tasted the quiet victory of doing things for myself, I knew the story was turning. I was learning to stand again. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but steadily, like roots finding soil after being torn out. My life was no longer about what had been taken from me. It was about what I was quietly reclaiming. 6 months passed, and I had begun to settle into a rhythm of quiet independence. My morning started with tea instead of rushing through coffee. My evenings ended with the sound of the river outside my window instead of the muffled arguments from Ethan and Melissa's living room. I had keys on my table, not garbage bags at my feet. I thought perhaps the worst was behind me. Then, one Saturday morning, as sunlight crept across the curtains, my phone began to buzz. At first I ignored it, but it buzzed again and again, relentless. When I finally picked it up, my screen was flooded with notifications. 90 messages, all from Ethan. My hand trembled as I scrolled. The first few were frantic. "Mom, please, answer me." Then sharper, "I need you right now. Everything's falling apart." Then a flood of desperation. "Melissa left. She took the kids. I lost all the money. Crypto crashed. The accounts are empty. I don't know what to do. I need you. Please, Mom." I sat down heavily in the chair by the window. 90 messages. His words were messy, rushed, filled with typos, as if typed through tears. I could almost hear his voice, that same voice that once begged for cough syrup when he was small, the same voice that told me to leave my own home. My fingers hovered over the screen. A part of me, the part that carried him through fevers, that held his hand on the first day of school, that remembered the weight of his head resting on my shoulder, ached to answer, to say, "I'm here. You'll be all right. We'll fix this." That part of me had been the foundation of my life for decades. But another part, one I had been carefully nurturing these past months, resisted. It whispered, "He left you with garbage bags at the gate. He told you to go. He chose his wife's voice over yours. Do not forget." I closed my eyes, and the images flickered in my mind. The sound of Melissa's cold command, "Not think, but must." Ethan's head bowed, then his quiet betrayal. "Mom, I agree. You have to leave." The crack of my husband's coffee cup breaking against the pavement as it fell out of the trash bag. My hand trembling as I picked up the sweater I had knitted for him, years ago, treated like waste. Now he was the one discarded. Melissa gone. His investments, illusions of wealth, evaporated. He was reaching for me the way a drowning man reaches for air. My heart ached. My pulse quickened. I placed the phone down, face down, on the table. I rose, walked to the balcony, and let the cool wind steady me. The river below moved at its own pace, not rushing, not hesitating. I whispered into the air, more to myself than to anyone. What is the cost of forgiveness? What is the price of forgetting? The screen still glowed behind me. More messages kept coming, each more desperate. Please, Mom, I'll do anything. I need you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His words blurred in my vision as tears gathered. I pressed the heel of my hand to my chest, feeling the pounding of a heart that had been broken, stitched together, and broken again. For a long time, I simply stood there, torn between two lives. The mother who always rushed in to rescue, and the woman who had finally learned to protect herself. Which role would I choose now? I turned back toward the table. The phone lay silent for a moment, then buzzed again, as if to demand my decision. I picked it up, unlocked it, and stared at the messages. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Just one word could undo months of rebuilding. Just one reply could pull me back into the storm. But I did not answer. Not yet. Instead, I locked the phone, set it aside, and wrapped my hands around a warm cup of tea. The porcelain did not tremble like my fingers. I lifted it, took a slow sip, and breathed. The taste was grounding, solid. Mine. 90 messages waited. They would wait longer. My heart whispered, "This time, you get to choose." And for the first time in a long time, I let the silence be my answer. I walked into the cafe on Main Street with a calm steadiness, the same way I had taught myself to walk into each new chapter of my life these past months. The bell above the door jingled softly, and I inhaled the scent of roasted beans and buttered pastries. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was there. Then my eyes found Ethan. He sat by the window, shoulders slumped, his frame thinner than I remembered. His hair, once carefully styled, stuck out at odd angles. His shirt looked wrinkled, as if pulled from a pile instead of a drawer. He wasn't scrolling his phone this time. He was staring into a paper cup, both hands wrapped around it, as if he needed the heat to keep himself upright. I slid into the chair across from him. Neither of us spoke at first. I could see the weight of shame pressing down on him, the same way I had once carried the weight of bills, mortgages, and his childhood illnesses without complaint. Finally, his voice broke the silence. It was low, ragged. "Mom, I messed up, badly." I kept my gaze steady, waiting. He swallowed, eyes flicking to mine before darting away. I had to sell the house fast. I couldn't keep up with the payments. Melissa, she left, took the kids and moved back with her parents. The money I thought I had, it's all gone. Crypto, the stock tips I followed, it all collapsed. I'm broke, Mom. I've got nothing left. He pressed his palms together, as though in prayer, and whispered, "I want to come back. I want to live with you." The words hung between us. I felt them in my chest, sharp and heavy, like stones sinking into water. My son, the boy I once carried through rain to a clinic, was now begging for a place to stay. I let the silence stretch. He shifted in his seat, fidgeted with the rim of his cup. My silence was not cruelty. It was the only way I could breathe. At last, I spoke. My voice was calm, measured, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. 6 months ago, Ethan, you stood at the gate with Melissa and told me I had to leave. My life was placed beside garbage bags, as though I were disposable. His eyes dropped to the table. I saw his throat tighten, but I did not stop. Today, I will not do the same to you. I will not treat you as you treated me, but hear me clearly. I will also not allow history to repeat itself." He looked up, desperate, tears pricking his eyes. "Mom, please. I just need time, just until I get back on my feet." I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain envelope. I slid it across the table, my fingers brushing the worn wood as I let it go. Inside, there was no check, no key, only a neatly written list of affordable housing options I had gathered, along with the name and number of a bankruptcy attorney who had once helped a colleague of mine. Ethan picked it up, confusion flickering across his face. He opened it, scanned the contents, and then looked at me with disbelief. "That's it? You won't help me?" "I am helping you," I said gently, "but not in the way you imagine. This is your path, Ethan. You need to stand, to rebuild, to carry your own weight. I carried you long enough." His face crumpled. "But I'm your son. And I am your mother," I answered, steady as stone. "That is why I refuse to let you drag me back into the wreckage. Love does not mean surrender. Love, real love, sometimes means letting you face the fire so you can learn to walk through it." We sat in silence again. Around us, the cafe buzzed with chatter and laughter, the world moving on without noticing the quiet battlefield at our table. Ethan folded the paper, hands trembling, and tucked it into his pocket. I reached for my cup of tea. Its warmth steadied me, just as it had on the first night I chose not to answer his desperate messages. I sipped slowly, then met his eyes. "This is not the end of us, Ethan, but it is a new beginning, on new terms. You will stand on your own 2 feet, or you will not stand at all." He nodded faintly, though the fight had gone out of him. For the first time, I saw not just my son, but a man stripped of illusions, forced to confront the truth of his choices. I stood, placed a few bills on the table for my tea, and rested my hand on his shoulder. Light, brief, but certain. "You will find your way, but not in my home. Not this time." Then I walked out into the crisp air, my steps firm, the sound of the bell above the door marking the moment I left the old patterns behind for good. That day, for the first time in years, I felt the balance between us shift. Not cruelly, not vengefully, but with quiet justice. The mother who once carried him had finally set him down and let him walk. That night, I returned to my apartment by the river, the key cool and familiar in my hand. The evening air smelled faintly of rain, though no storm had fallen. Inside, the quiet was sharp. It wrapped around me as I set down my coat and placed the empty envelope that had held Ethan's new directions on the small table by the door. My body was steady, but my heart quaked. I moved to the desk in the corner, where a stack of blank paper waited. I had always kept it near, though rarely used it. Tonight, my hands reached for it without hesitation. I sat down, uncapped my pen, and began to write, not to send, not to deliver, but to release. "Ethan," I wrote, the letters clear, deliberate, a mother's handwriting softened by age, but not by weakness. "I remember a night when you were 5. Rain poured from the sky as if the heavens themselves were breaking. You burned with fever, and I carried you through the streets, my arms aching, my dress soaked through, my hair clinging to my face. I remember how small you were against me, your breath hot against my neck. I remember praying, not for myself, but for you. Every step I took was a promise, that I would not let you fall." The pen trembled slightly as I paused. My eyes drifted to the small shelf where the green coffee cup sat, its handle cracked but carefully glued back into place. That cup had belonged to his father. Each morning, I had washed it, dried it, and set it out. Even after his father passed, I had treated it as though caring for it kept him with us. I bent closer to the paper and kept writing. Your father's coffee cup has been my companion longer than you realize. It survived every move, every loss. Every morning I woke before dawn to work 2 jobs so you could grow. I held on to it as if it were him, as if through it I could pour myself the strength I no longer had. And I kept it for you too, because I wanted you to remember that love is something poured out daily, not just spoken. My voice caught as the words filled the page. The sound in my head was like a whisper. If someone were listening, it would have been a voiceover, a mother's confession echoing through the dark. I continued. 6 months ago, you placed my life on the curb in garbage bags. I watched as the cup I had cherished lay broken among old clothes and memories. You did not see me bend to pick it up, but I did. I carried it with me, wrapped it in cloth, and later glued it back together. It is not what it once was, Ethan, but it still holds, just as I still hold love for you. Tears blurred my vision, but my pen moved on. I cannot give you back the safety of childhood. I cannot carry you as I once did through the rain. You must carry yourself now. But I will never stop being your mother. My love remains, even if my home does not. I forgive you, Ethan, but forgiveness is not the same as surrender. You will build your own roof, your own table, your own mornings. That is how you will grow. That is how you will honor what I gave. I placed the pen down. The silence pressed closer, thick with the weight of what I had released. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases flat, and slipped it into an old wooden box I kept beneath the desk. Inside already lay small relics of my life. Photographs, the train ticket stubs from my retirement journey, and now, this letter. Gently, I lifted the green coffee cup and placed it inside the box as well. Its glued seam caught the lamplight, imperfect but whole, a symbol of both breakage and endurance. I closed the lid slowly, as if sealing both grief and hope inside. My heart felt heavy but lighter at once. This letter would never be mailed. Ethan would never read it. But it was not for him. It was for me, to put into words what had haunted me, and to let the words rest in silence. I whispered into the room, my voice low but certain. I forgive you, my son. But I will not lose myself again. The weight shifted in my chest, and I felt something new. Not rage, not despair, but a quiet strength. I had chosen my boundary, clear as day. I would not cast him away as he had done to me, but I would not allow him to step over the line I had drawn. Forgiveness and protection could coexist. Love and distance could stand side by side. I moved to the window and opened it wide. The city lights shimmered against the river, each reflection breaking and reforming on the water's surface. I breathed in deeply, letting the night air wash over me. In that moment, I knew. This was the pivot. This was where pain bent toward healing, where anger dissolved into resolve. Ethan's fate would be his own to shape. Mine, at last, was firmly in my own hands. I closed the window gently, turned off the lamp, and slipped into bed. My body relaxed into the quiet, my soul steadier than it had been in years. The letter, the cup, the memories, they would remain with me. But I, Sylvia, would move forward, unburdened. I learned what accountability looks like when no one narrates it, and no camera lingers for applause. It arrived in envelopes and court stamps, in emails that began with notice and ended with balance due. I did not orchestrate any of it. I did not even answer every message. I watched the weeks turn like pages, and Ethan's choices caught up to Ethan. The first envelope came to my address by mistake, a creditor still linking me to the old house. I walked it back to the mailbox. Later, Claire texted a photo from the courthouse postings. A small notice listed my son among defendants for unpaid accounts. I looked at the photo and turned my phone face down. Through neighbors who still write me, I heard he lost his position at the agency. They called it restructuring. Friday came, and his badge no longer opened the door. He walked out carrying a cardboard box. Bills have a way of learning to run faster than people. Collections found him. The car went first. He returned it 2 months behind and left the lot with a bus schedule folded into his pocket like a new map he did not want. A friend loaned him a sublet for 3 weeks. The friend's lease ended, and the couch ended with it. He slept 2 nights at a motel by the highway. Housing offices do not care about charisma. They care about forms with boxes and proof. He stood in lines where everyone keeps their face toward the floor. He filled out applications with tired handwriting, the numbers on his pay stubs no longer enough to lift him above the cutoff. A clerk slid a brochure beneath glass and said low-income units might open in the fall. One afternoon, I walked the river path and saw him across the street, shoulders rounded under a jacket too thin for wind. He did not see me. He was reading a notice taped to a door. I stopped behind a tree and let him have his privacy, the only gift I could manage. Melissa sent a message once to a group thread still barely alive, asking about rooms to rent near her parents. Later, I heard she moved farther out with the children, closer to a job with regular hours and health insurance. Ethan finally found a room near the rail yard, 3 floors up, window that faced a brick wall. The rent was low because the stairs were steep and the heat clanked like an old parade. He texted me the address with no flourish. I saved it. I did not visit. Love does not always knock right away. He picked up shifts stocking shelves at a warehouse store, then weekend work with a moving crew. The first time he lifted a dresser wrong, he wrenched his back and spent a night on the floor with a towel rolled under his knees. The next morning, he filled orders and learned to bend with his legs. He learned bus routes by heart and which laundromats take quarters. Creditors still called. He learned to answer and negotiate, to ask for plans that did not drown him. A bankruptcy attorney, the same name I had tucked into the cafe envelope, filed his case in early spring. The paperwork was bland and merciless. It required classes with sober titles about money and behavior. At the creditors' meeting, he sat under fluorescent lights while a trustee asked simple questions that landed like stones. He answered yes, then no, then I do not know, and signed papers that felt heavier than any dresser he had carried all summer. I did not fix any of it. I did not send rent money in a late-night rush of mercy. I stood at my window and watched the river keep its pace. Accountability is not a crowd scene. It is a man waking at 5 to catch the first bus. It is a signature under oath. It is the quiet decision to stop promising and start paying. One evening, near the end of summer, I walked past his building on my way to the market. I did not plan it. On the stoop sat Ethan with a small bag of groceries between his shoes. Bread, eggs, a jar of peanut butter, and an apple. He held the apple like a reminder that something can still be sweet. I kept walking. At the corner, I paused and turned just enough to see him break the apple clean with his hands and offer the larger half to a boy from the second floor. The boy grinned and sat beside him. Ethan showed the boy how to juggle two pieces and catch one. It was not redemption. It was a note held on a steadier pitch. That night, I wrote one sentence in my notebook of things I can do. I can let consequences teach. It was not triumph. It was not cruelty. It was the simplest trust I could practice. He had reached for air and found ground. My part was to remain the shore he might recognize from a distance, steady, undecorated, still there. Accountability is not revenge. It is daylight returning at the same time each morning, whether we are ready or not. I set my alarm, brewed tea in my own kitchen, and wished my son another ordinary day to try again. I had thought my apartment would always feel temporary, a holding place between who I used to be and who I had yet to become. But one autumn evening, when the air carried the smell of wood smoke and the river shimmered with orange reflections, I opened my door and realized I had begun to shape a new kind of family. Not the one bound by blood, but the one stitched together by choice, by kindness, by survival. Claire arrived first, balancing a casserole dish under one arm and a bottle of sparkling cider under the other. She kissed my cheek, her perfume soft, familiar, grounding. Behind her came Ruth, a widow from my building who had lost her husband 3 winters ago. She carried a tray of cookies she had baked with her granddaughter that afternoon. Then Marion, who had once shared my bus stop on the way to work years ago, now walking slowly with a cane, but smiling wide, as though she had been waiting her whole life for an invitation like this. I set the table with mismatched plates gathered from thrift shops and donations. Nothing matched, but somehow everything belonged. Candles flickered low, catching the glassware with gentle sparks. The casserole steamed, bread warmed in the oven, and butter softened on the counter. We pulled chairs from every corner of my little apartment and squeezed them around the table. When we finally sat, there was a silence, not awkward, but sacred. The kind that happens when everyone recognizes they are exactly where they should be. We began with stories. Claire teased me about the time we had worked late into the night at the firm, fueled only by vending machine peanuts and instant coffee. Ruth described her husband's old fishing trips, her eyes shining not with sorrow, but with pride. Marion told us about the garden she had once tended, about tomatoes sweet enough to eat like apples. Each story was a gift, handed across the table like bread. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, I noticed my young neighbor Lena hovering near the door. She is barely 20, a student who works nights at the diner down the street. She had stopped by to borrow some sugar a week earlier, and I had invited her to join us if she was ever free. Now, she stood uncertain, her hands tucked into her sweatshirt pocket. I waved her in. "There's always room for one more," I said. She blushed, slipped off her shoes, and found a seat at the corner of the table. As the others welcomed her, she kept glancing at me, studying my face as though searching for something. Finally, when the room had relaxed again, she leaned close and whispered, "You remind me of my mother." Her words landed like a hand pressed gently on my heart. For years, I had carried the belief that my worth was measured by one son's approval. Yet here was this young woman, not bound to me by blood, seeing me as a figure of care, of steadiness. I touched her hand and said softly, "Then maybe tonight you found a second one." She smiled, eyes glistening. We passed plates of cookies. We refilled glasses. We laughed at Claire's old office jokes that still somehow held their charm. Ruth sang a hymn under her breath while washing dishes, and Marion showed Lena how to fold napkins into neat triangles. My small apartment, once filled with the scent of cardboard boxes and loneliness, now overflowed with cinnamon, butter, candlelight, and voices. When the last plate was stacked and the final cup was rinsed, we lingered in the living room. Claire stretched her legs on the ottoman. Ruth pulled a shawl over her shoulders. Marion tapped her cane softly against the floor, as though marking rhythm to a tune only she could hear. Lena curled against the armchair, her head tilted toward me with trust. I looked around and felt something shift deep inside. Blood family had cast me aside. Yet here, in this circle of chosen family, I was not disposable. I was seen, valued, cherished, not as a burden, not as a leftover, not as a line item in someone else's plans. I was a person who still had stories to tell, pies to bake, hands to hold. Before we parted, I handed each of them a small keepsake from my boxes. Ruth received a scarf I had knitted years ago. Marion took a small teacup with a crack carefully mended in gold glue. Claire accepted an old office pen, joking she would now have no excuse to forget to write. And Lena, with her trembling fingers, accepted a small ceramic heart I had found at a yard sale. She tucked it into her pocket like it was the most precious thing she owned. When the door closed behind the last guest, I sat alone in the quiet hum of my apartment. Yet I did not feel alone. Their voices still echoed, warm as the glow of the last candle. The air held the scent of baked bread and shared hope. I realized then that family is not only inherited, it is cultivated. It is not about who leaves you with garbage bags at the gate. It is about who shows up with casseroles, cookies, and stories, who sits in mismatched chairs around a crowded table, and who whispers that you remind them of someone they love. That night, as I washed the final glass and placed it upside down on the rack, I whispered into the room, "I am home," and for the first time in years, I meant it. Morning returned like a familiar hymn. The kettle rattled, the river moved in a patient ribbon, and I set a cup on the counter with the steadiness of a practiced hand. I lifted my husband's sea-green coffee cup from its shelf. The glued seam along the handle caught a thin line of light. Beside it, on a small dish by the door, my new keys waited. Brass teeth, ordinary, miraculous. I brewed tea, carried the tray to the table, and placed the cup next to the keys. The still life felt like a verdict and a blessing. I touched porcelain and metal and whispered, "It may crack, but it will not break. It may be lost, but it will not disappear." I was speaking to the cup. I was speaking to myself. The apartment had learned me. Plants turned toward the window each morning. A corkboard near the desk held lists with blue check marks. The bookshelf carried ledgers beside a few stubborn novels. Garbage bags had once announced my exile. Keys now announced my claim. The image, cup and keys, was a circle closing and a door opening. Claire knocked and slid inside with a paper bag. "Bagels," she said, cheeks flushed from the walk. We broke warm bread and ate with quiet appetite. She looked at the table, saw the pairing, and nodded. "Full circle," she murmured, "and one turn more." Blessing can be that small. After she left, I opened my notebook and wrote the title that had been pulling at me for weeks. from garbage bags to new keys. People at the community center kept asking how to open accounts, how to guard pensions, how to live alone without apology. I do not enjoy microphones, but I honor questions. I built a simple blog and began. The first entry told the story straight, without garnish. The second explained a revocable trust in plain language: what it is, who holds it, why it shields. The third offered a grocery list for one and a pot of soup that lasts through Tuesday. I added a page titled Rituals. I wrote that rinsing a favorite cup can be a way to remind your hands they still belong to you. I pressed publish and let the river keep moving. An hour later, a comment appeared. Thank you. I see myself here. Then another. My daughter sent me this. I thought I was alone. Another. You turned pain into a map. I printed that line and pinned it under the words, keep going. Mondays, I joined a seniors yoga class at the rec center. Our mats squeaked. Our instructor reminded us to unclench our jaws. In warrior pose, I felt foolish and sturdy. In savasana, I wept for 3 minutes and stood up lighter. A woman named B squeezed my hand and said, "It gets quieter. Not easier, quieter." We walked home 2 blocks together, 2 women finding a workable pace. Wednesdays, I wrote. The blog gathered readers with names I would never learn in person. A grandmother in Phoenix, a nurse in Buffalo, a son who wished he had known how to help his mother. I answered some comments with specifics and others with one sentence. You are not disposable. On Thursdays, the community center hosted a free clinic on basic legal tools. Arthur, my late husband's attorney, agreed to teach once a month. I poured tea and translated the vocabulary of power into kitchen English. I began carrying index cards in my purse with 3 lines: a hotline, a legal aid site, and the sentence I had spoken over the cup. It may crack, but it will not break. I handed them out quietly, seeds in unassuming envelopes. Life stayed ordinary and runnable. I cooked beans on Sundays and froze portions. I patched the elbow of my sweater. I changed the smoke detector batteries before they could complain at 2 in the morning. There was progress I could measure. A woman wrote, I opened my own bank account today. Another, I asked to be added to the deed. Another, I left, and I am still leaving. The cup and the keys kept their post on the table. I took photographs for the blog, the repaired handle catching morning, the keys fanned like letters spelling home. My hands, older, steady, framing both. I did not show my face. This is a faceless story. The objects speak. One evening, Lena from down the hall knocked with a resume. We turned apologies into verbs and trimmed the rest. She hugged me at the door and said, You make it feel possible. When she left, I stood with my palm on the wood, grateful for the simple reciprocity of hope. Small invitations arrived. A library asked me to give a talk. I declined and wrote a printable guide instead. A local radio show asked for an interview. I said yes when they promised no spectacle. After it aired, more messages. I cleaned out the drawer of old envelopes and slept better. Bless you for speaking softly. On my birthday, Claire gave me a keychain shaped like a tiny house. We attached it to my ring. The keys chimed against one another like coins in a fountain. We walked to the river, saying nothing for a long stretch. Friendship knows when silence is the truest language. Back home, I brewed tea again. I set the sea green cup beside the keys and took a photo. I posted it with the line that had become a refrain. It may crack, but it will not break. It may be lost, but it will not disappear. Comments bloomed like lanterns in a dark field. My mother would have loved you. I am 30, and you made me rethink how I speak to the women who raised me. I thought I was the only one who picked her life up off the curb. I am not alone. A retired electrician wrote to say he fixed his porch light and felt the room in his chest brighten too. A teacher shared my guide with her adulted class. A granddaughter printed the mantra and taped it inside her grandmother's cupboard. They wrote thanks. I do not trust tidy endings. I trust faithful continuations. The circle is not perfect. It is a spiral that returns to the same places with more room each time. Some mornings the old ache wakes with me. I touch the mended seam and remember. Then the kettle hums, the river argues for motion, and I choose it. I choose again. I put the cup back on its shelf and hang the keys by the door. Tomorrow I will pour tea at the clinic, walk to yoga, write 2 paragraphs, and answer 3 messages with care. I will buy a slice of pie and eat it on the balcony as the light goes gold. If you are listening and have ever stood at a gate with your life packed in bags, hear me. You are not the trash. You are the keeper of the keys. Come sit at the table. We will make tea. We will plan. We will move forward together, quietly and steadily, until quiet sounds like victory. The phone buzzed once on the table. I almost ignored it, but habit drew my eyes. The screen showed Ethan's name, a message shorter than breath. Mom, I'm sorry. Whenever you're ready, I'll wait. My hand hovered, then lowered. I did not type back. I set the phone face down, the quiet pulse of it fading into the hum of the evening. I carried my tea to the balcony. The river lay below, a long necklace of light, each ripple catching sunset and returning it brighter. Cars whispered across the bridge. Laughter floated from the park where children stretched the last of daylight. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and leaned into the chair. The world was steady, without answers. Inside, the table bore its familiar still life, the mended cup and the new keys. I looked at them through the open door. 2 objects, 2 truths, something broken, still useful, something new, claiming space. They watched me as I watched the river, companions in silence. I thought of the years when Ethan's laugh filled these kinds of evenings, when his hands reached for mine without shame. I thought of Melissa's sharp voice in my kitchen, her eyes already measuring my absence before it was real. Then I thought of Claire, of Bea from yoga, of Lena's resume, of the neighbors who passed bread across my small table. The ledger was not simple. It was weighted with loss and balanced with unexpected gifts. I did not know what would happen with Ethan. Maybe he would build from the ruins. Maybe he would wander longer in them. My choice was not to decide his outcome, but to protect mine. Boundaries, once foreign, had become fluent. The message on my phone did not undo the seam in the cup or pry the keys from my hand. It simply existed, like a note left under a mat, waiting. I could open it someday, or never. Both were survival. Both were love, in their own measured way. I whispered into the dusk, not certain if it was prayer or reminder. Some doors close, so we can walk through others. The balcony air carried it back to me, cool and sure. I don't know what tomorrow holds, I said, but I know this. I will never again be set beside garbage bags. The words landed in my chest with the weight of a vow and the lift of release. Healing is not loud. It is steady, like a river, like a breath. I lifted the keys from the dish and held them in my palm. They were warm from the sun's last rays. Brass teeth glowed like small torches. I curled my fingers around them, felt the weight. the promise. The camera of memory drew close, framed tight on the ring of keys against my skin. Fade, not into darkness, but into light, the kind you carry forward. Before I let go, I thought of you, whoever sits in another room, watching this unfold. Maybe it is morning where you are, the day beginning with steam rising from a cup of coffee. Maybe it is late night, and stories like this keep you company when silence grows too sharp. Wherever you are, know that I read the comments, each one a thread tying us across distance. Your words are not wasted. They reach, they steady, they heal. If my story pressed against your own, if it stirred something tender or strong, I ask you to stay. Subscribe, not just to hear another tale, but to belong to a circle that still believes in kindness, in healing, in second chances. We are scattered across cities and rivers, across mornings and nights. But here we gather, not to forget our wounds, but to honor the way we mend them. Thank you for giving me this time. Thank you for sitting with me by the river, for holding the cup and the keys in your imagination. Carry them into your own days. Remember that sometimes the miracle does not knock loudly. It waits, patient, until you are ready to turn the lock, open the door, and let your heart breathe again. Take care wherever you are. Until the next story, keep your keys close, your cup steady, and your courage quiet but unbroken. I will see you there.